Some of my favorite words to hear at the beginning of a story are driving alone and in the woods at night. You just know something real and terrifying is about to happen and send a good chill down your spine once you hear those words. And now, you've heard those words. But there are some other words that are just as terrifying. Ghosts, haunted, demon, paranormal, principalities, and powers. In the right context, they can get your hair standing up straight. But a lot of times, they don't mean anything to most people the same way driving alone in the woods at night does. And that's because driving alone in the woods at night brings to the imagination several tangible possibilities you could encounter, like getting abducted, hacked to pieces for some occult ritual, or just a straight-up serial killer. But with ghosts, demons, and paranormal activity, what exactly can you expect? Aren't they just stories with low-res pictures as proof? Well, after the stories at the end of this video, you tell me. Two priests walk into a bar. Not exactly the words you expect to hear before a horrifying story. But in the spirit of digging through narratives, what better way to start than with one of the most popular narratives of demon possession in modern times, The Exorcist. It's been regarded by many as one of the greatest and most successful horror or R-rated movies of all time, grossing at over $400 million. The story follows a young girl who gets possessed by a demon, or the devil himself, gains superhuman strength, vomits black liquids at people, and has several marks appear on her skin. Eventually, two priests take on the deathly task of exorcising the demons in her, and succeed. The movie is so eerie that even several viewers were reported to suffer in one way or another watching the movie. Miscarriages, heart attacks, and several cinematic neuroses were reported from viewers that saw the movie. As a matter of fact, production of the movie suffered a lot of setbacks, like a fire that destroyed most of the set and on-set accidents to actresses Ellen Burstyn and Linda Blair that would leave them with long-term injuries. It's almost like someone or something didn't want this movie to happen. But why? Isn't this just a portrayal of a fictional novel, right? I think you know the answer to that question. I think you know where this is going. It's a scary thought, isn't it? That a story so visceral is actually based on real-life events. The story that inspired The Exorcist is just as chilling. But of course, there are little differences. Differences like the fact that the possessed child is said to be a boy, not a girl. So, how did the story go? Well, two priests walk into a boy's life which is, quite frankly, hell. The identity of the boy is unknown, but he's referred to as 12-year-old Roland Doe. His story begins in the late 1940s, in suburban Washington, D.C., with his Aunt Harriet. Aunt Harriet was into spiritism, and she often practiced with Roland on her Ouija board and such. Perhaps, on one of these occasions, they had managed to summon a demon, because Aunt Harriet would die, and Roland's mental health would deteriorate almost immediately. He began hearing scratches on the walls and floors. He noticed his bed moving positions, and he also noticed taps and walls begin leaking inexplicably. After seeking help from qualified hospitals, they decided to also try spiritual solutions. First, Father Albert E. Hughes would try his hands at an exorcism. He bound Roland to the bed and began recitations. However, Roland reacted by breaking free from his bonds, breaking a piece of the mattress spring, and slashing Father Albert across the shoulders. Was Father Albert absolutely gobsmacked at young Roland's strength? You bet he was, seeing as the rite was left unfinished and he never returned. Roland's family would find markings on the boy's skin that read Louis. His mother would take it as a sign that they would find help in St. Louis, where they had relatives. Well, they found two Catholic priests willing to complete the exorcism, Father Walter Halloran and Reverend William Bode. Their personal diaries would help in the development of the story. Exorcising Roland would take weeks. In those weeks, they saw flying objects, superhuman strength, sudden outbursts, and screams in a guttural voice. More scratches with symbols and letters on his skin, and more. At some point, Roland's parents almost gave up and sent him to a hospital. And even when it was obvious that wouldn't work, Halloran and Bode resumed their rites. Every night for weeks, they continued, and they eventually cured Roland. On the 18th of April 1949, Roland would come out of his trance. The Skeptical Inquirer and The Guardian have identified Roland Doe to be a man named Ronald Edwin Hunkeler, who died in 2020. After the exorcism was completed, Ronald would go on to live a normal life, even having a family. Pride comes before a bark. Unlike Ronald Hunkeler, not everyone gets to mess with spiritual forces and live to tell the tale. Our next story takes us all the way from Washington, D.C., across the Atlantic Ocean, and all the way to the region now known as Nigeria in Africa. Back then, explorers dared not wander into the heart of Africa for fear of death, because it seemed like the land was hell-bent on protecting its people. The heart of the African Sahara was referred to as the white man's grave, as the spirits of the land were always keen on taking the lives of any aliens. Well, today we now know that it was all just good old tropical diseases like malaria that the indigenous people had adapted to. But far more sinister things happened in sub-Saharan Africa that are still quite mysterious. One that stands out is the story of Chief Bode Thomas. The story is set in the British colony and protectorate of Nigeria in 1953. Or more specifically, it's rooted in a dispute between the Alaafin of Oyo, a king, and Bode Thomas at the Oyo Divisional Council meeting in November of 1953. First, let's clear some things up. Oyo is an empire that spanned most of southwestern Nigeria and other regions, and it belonged to the Yoruba people of modern-day Nigeria. The Alaafin is considered as the ruler of this great empire, and like other Yoruba rulers, he's seen as the head and custodian of the people, gods, and the ancestors. Some past kings of the same title have even been deified into gods, like Shungo, the Yoruba god of thunder. One other interesting feature of the Yoruba line of kings is their ability to strike people with spirits that could result in madness or even death. I think you know where this is going. The council on that fateful day had both the king and Bode Thomas in attendance. One important detail is that Mr. Thomas had only just replaced the king as the head of the council that day. Oh, and Bode Thomas was very rich, young, and educated, so naturally, he was said to be arrogant too. When the then 34-year-old walked into the meeting, everyone stood up to acknowledge his presence. Everyone but the 60-year-old king, of course. This is not surprising, as Yoruba tradition is very serious about respecting elders and, more importantly, traditional rulers. So you can imagine the king's surprise when Mr. Bode Thomas was furious with him, requesting why he did not rise to greet him. "Why were you sitting when I walked in? Why can't you respect me?" said Bode Thomas. The baffled king, Adeyemi II, replied in the Yoruba language, "Is it me you're barking like a dog at? Continue to bark." The meeting would still follow its due course to conclusion, but sure enough, the dispute wasn't over. Various reports claim that when Mr. Thomas returned home to Lagos, he actually began barking. He was taken for further treatment, but would give up the ghost the next day after vomiting a lot of blood. It was precise, unmistakable, and quick. Was it the ghosts of the ancestors standing up for their own? Was it demonic powers, or just some form of illness? The answer remains unknown to this day. The Haunting of Wood's House. For the third and final entry into horrifying ghost and demon stories, I'm going all out. This one has almost everything. It's a haunted house, it has to do with the woods, and most importantly, it's a real-life story from Reddit. I'm excited already. Hope you're scared too. A Reddit user with the name MissyB67 posted a very interesting story in the Ghost subreddit. It was a detail of her personal experiences at the house she grew up in. She lists several paranormal activities and the different ages she was when she experienced them. And some of them are just downright, well, creepy. Let's take a look. The user says that the house was built from the ground up on a space that her parents had cleared within the woods. Her strange experiences began at the age of 6. She and her sister would hear sounds from across the house, sounds that ceased whenever they neared. At the age of 9, she woke up to a shadowy figure of a girl in the room, holding up a glowing lantern. She screamed, and it disappeared. At the age of 13, she had heard a full conversation between what sounded like a man and a woman. Whenever she turned on the lights, it would stop. This continued for about 20 minutes, till she went to find solace in her mother's room. Good thing, because her mom needed some comforting too. Her mom had woken up at 3 a.m. to her landline phone off the hook and laid perfectly beside the phone. A collect call message was playing, but nothing was being said until after 20 seconds, when she heard a rough, male voice say, "I told you so." Missy B. 67 recounted more stories, but what was more eerie was the fact that some people related to her stories, people who claimed to have lived in haunted houses as well. One that stood out in particular was a user that said the rooms were always cold, and Missy B. 67 agreed. Eventually, after moving out, she claimed that the occurrences stopped. She couldn't figure out if the land they had built in was cursed, or if it was the fault of a vase they had bought that coincided with all the weird things happening in the home. There's so much we don't know, and so much to discover. And you can start by clicking on the video on the screen right now, and I'll see you there.